Hello and welcome back to another episode of All in All with Alex. I'm your host, of course, Alex. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. William Allen.
Hi, Alex. How are you? Thanks for
You-
having me on.
Oh yeah, no problem. Appreciate you taking your time to come on. I know we all are pretty busy, have a lot of things going on in life, but it's definitely good to have a sit down with you. So we're gonna jump straight into it. I know people are here. They want to hear what we got planned for today. So we're gonna start off with just can you give them a quick little background about yourself?
Yeah, I'm retired now, but I had a job for about 30 something years working in information technology as a manager. I have a degree in psychology, which I never did use. I never went on to get a graduate degree, but nevertheless, it served me pretty well. And probably about, I'd say probably about 10, 15 years ago, I found out about this personality trait that I have, and a lot of other people have as well,
Mhm.
called high sensitivity. And I did some, took me a couple of years after I read the book that Dr. Elaine Aaron wrote, which just about everybody who has this trait has read. And it took me a while to get my hands around. It's a really difficult concept for a lot of men to admit that they have this high sensitive trait. But once I got myself wrapped around that, I was able to start blogging about it and started doing that for a couple of years and realized that, I could probably write a book about this specifically for highly sensitive men. So that's what I did. I wrote two books at once. The first book is called Confessions of a Sensitive Man. The other one is called On Being a Sensitive Man. And I self-published those a couple of years ago, and I've been on this track ever since, promoting this trait, this personality trait, to help educate people about what it is, and especially for highly sensitive men who may be struggling with the idea of this trait. So it's good to be able to help educate people about it. And
Okay,
that's going to take me up right to where I'm at right now.
okay, okay. So can you define can you define what a highly sensitive man is so that way viewers can make sure they're on the same page as us?
Absolutely. And that's a good question, too, because a lot of people don't have misunderstandings about high sensitivity, what it is. First of all, it's a personality temperament trait. That means you're born with this trait. It's usually passed down generation to generation. A lot of times, parents are highly sensitive and have highly sensitive children. Sometimes parents are not highly sensitive, but they still carry the gene for it. And high sensitivity is genetic largely. Um, it has four main characteristics to it that most highly sensitive people have. And that is represented by an acronym that Dr. Aaron uses a lot. It's called DOES, DOES. The D stands for depth of processing. Highly sensitive people really deep dive on stuff. They take in a lot of sensory information, which is part of what the sensitive part of this is. And once they get it inside their brains, they start really churning it and processing it and going over it in very deep, fine detail. This is a characteristic that most highly sensitive, probably all highly sensitive people have, is this ability to be able to process information at a very deep level. The O stands for overstimulation, and that usually happens to people who are highly sensitive because we're taking in so much information. You can imagine having a computer and you're just running every task in the book on the computer, and eventually what happens is it just kind of freezes up because it's overstimulated or overtasked. And that's what happens to a lot of highly sensitive people. This is something that I think people notice about highly sensitive people is they kind of get overstimulated and then they have to kind of shut down and go someplace quiet and process the information that they've received, and also have a chance to sort of re-energize themselves. So overstimulation is another characteristic of highly sensitive people. The E stands for two things. It stands for emotional reactivity, because we're very emotional people. And I think that's another thing people notice about highly sensitive people, is that they tend to express their emotions more openly, more freely, and they are affected by their emotions in a lot of ways. The other side of that is empathy. We're very empathetic people. We care about what happens to other people, because a lot of times that empathy that we have is caused by the fact that we have more mirror neurons, or our mirror neurons are more active. That means that we feel and appreciate what other people are feeling. The last letter is S, and that is a sensitivity to the subtle things in the environment. So a highly sensitive person, if you take them to a party, they'll notice that the music may be maybe there's too much bass in the music, or maybe they'll notice the perfume that somebody's wearing across the room, or maybe the hors d'oeuvres are a little saltier than maybe they should be. That sensory information is part of and parcel of the way we process information, is we pick up those subtle cues in the environment. So taken as a whole, those four things are kind of indicators of someone being sensitive. It's not just somebody that is always emotional all the time, although that is in some ways part of it. It's more than that. It's a processing capability that highly sensitive people have. I like to look at it like this, Alex. If you were going to go take a very precise measurement with something, right, you'd want to use a tool or a measuring device that was very sensitive to what you're measuring, right? You don't want to use something that's not going to be picking up a good reading. But sometimes when you use a highly sensitive measuring tool, it has a particular level of tolerances. You may not be able to use it in freezing temperatures. You may not be able to use it in 150-degree heat either. So there is some give and take with that. But that's what highly sensitive people are. They're precision processors of information. And here's another interesting thing, too. 20 or 30% of the human population has this trait. This is not a 1 in a million type of thing. There's several billion people in the world who have this trait, half of which are men, half of which are women. It's not a more of a female thing versus a male thing. It's about half and half for both of those. So there are a lot of us out there, but very few. And although I'm happy to say more and more people are learning about it and understanding that they have the trait, but a lot of them don't. And that's one of the reasons why I like to talk on podcasts and help people understand what the trait is.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, it seems like, highly sensitive people, they're very, I would say, very detailed by what you're explaining. They're very detailed and very, very observant.
Exactly. And there's a reason for that. People say, well, why in the heck do we have highly sensitive people in the first place? Well, it's an evolutionary quality. It's sort of baked into the human population. You have a certain percentage of people that are going to be more cautious. They're going to be more aware of things that are going on in the environment. So long time ago, before we had, maybe the civilizations that we do today, and certainly the luxuries we have today, having highly sensitive people within your clan or your tribe or whatever was important, because they were the ones who noticed things like where the water was, where you eat, where danger might be. If you think of them like trail guides, if you're going to hike a trail that you've never been on before, it might be dangerous. And so you might want to have a person who knows the trail and picks up those kind of details. And that's what highly sensitive people, that's one of the original reasons why it's baked into the natural order. And it's not just humans. There's 100 animal species that show the same trait showing up in parts of their populations too. So it's not like a lot of people think, well, geez, that would be such a curse to be that emotional or that aware of things all the time. Well, it is and it isn't. But the point is that nature is furnished us for the survival of the human species as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what would you say would be some of the ups and downs of being highly sensitive?
Well, I tell you what, we'll start with the downs because that's probably the first thing people, if you've got listeners that are highly sensitive and they're starting to say, oh yeah, that sounds like me, then why do I have all these emotional outbursts? Why do I have to go, retire to a quiet room when I'm overstimulated? Those are some of the things that I think it's not so much the qualities of the trait, it's the individual's inability to understand or has not understood what these qualities are and how you can kind of get around them. So for example, if you get a sort of a meditation practice going or a relaxation practice or something that you do that calms you down and you get really focused and turned into that, what happens is that when you have these events, you become more resilient. So you can have an overstimulating event happen to you, but then you can recover more quickly. Getting maybe a little too emotional, you can learn about emotional regulation, how you can kind of temper and throttle your emotions to try to avoid those kind of things. So a lot of the downside of this is basically because people are never taught how to do this, right? And that includes even people who are not sensitive, reacting certain ways and learning how to control that. The upside is, I think, the output of all of this stimulation and processing and everything we do is an awareness of things, right? We see things like injustices. We see things like things that need to be changed. We see things, and a lot of times creative individuals, if you think of some of your favorite artists, whether musicians or artists or painters or writers or whoever, actors, these are people that very likely, not necessarily, but very likely are highly sensitive people because of the awareness they have to the craft that they're creating. And so they're able to take things like this little bit of data and this little bit of data and put it together and create something that's brand new, a piece of music, a piece of artwork, or a book or something. It's that ability to be aware of those things. And I think, to me, that is the most important and significant thing about the trait that people need to be aware of.
Okay. So do you feel like, because me just listening to you explain it, do you feel like people are sometimes like confusing highly sensitive with people that just have an attitude problem?
Oh yeah, that happens a lot. And I think sometimes, especially because highly sensitive people, you put them in a crowd of people, about 70% of highly sensitive people are introverted. And a lot of times introverts get a bad rap because they're quiet. And some people think, well, maybe they're stuck up or they're too good to talk or whatever. That's not the case at all. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion. In fact, even medical professionals misdiagnose this as autism or ADHD or a few other things that it gets confused with. And it's not like that at all. And one of the best ways to combat that confusion is just to educate people about the trait so they understand that if a highly sensitive person is quiet, it means likely that they're just processing the information you just shared with them. And they're not just yapping away, they're thinking about it and trying to figure out the best response. And that could also mean, too, that they're overstimulated. They just need to be quiet to settle themselves down a little bit.
Just me listening to you saying that last part about, whenever somebody, you say something to a highly sensitive person and, they may be quiet and having to, process the information. I see that a lot of myself. I process a lot before I say anything because, I want to make sure I have all the right information with different things that I do or say to people. Because, some people would just say stuff and not care what they say, or they not think about what the outcome of what they say is going to be. And I'm more so kind of, particular in what I do say to a person or how I do respond to something that is being said to me. So I definitely see some, some similarities in that with myself as well.
Well, that what you just explained to me suggests that, you have a high degree of empathy. You want to say the right thing when you're talking to somebody, think about it, process it. And you're doing some deep processing there to do that in order to kind of get the right way that you want to say that, because you care about how you affect other people. That's another trait that highly sensitive people have too. That's kind of a conglomeration of the other things I talked about. But being empathetic means you care about what happens to other people other than yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very likely that those are some of the qualities that highly sensitive people have. Yes.
That's interesting. That's interesting because I, you know, I was prepping some of the questions, you know, getting ready for the podcast, and you know, I wasn't, I would say I wasn't, you know, as I didn't have enough research on the topic to know, you know, the actual, you know, phases or the actual, you know, that does the terminology that you were speaking of.
Right.
You know, because like, you know, me just listening, talking back to him, I'm like, man, that's crazy. The only thing is, you know, the only thing is like, hey, I see all those factors in myself, is, you know, except for like emotional part. You know, that is the only part I really don't see as much, um, but definitely the thinking and the processing and the
Right.
empathy and you know, noticing, you know, always kind of noticing the surroundings and things like that, and being, you know, being quiet. I was always very quiet my entire life. I'm still kind of quiet now, but I host a podcast, so I have to speak. But I'm for the most part quiet. You know, sometimes I'll be, for example, like I'll be riding, and you know, me and my dad maybe going like an hour up the road, and we'll be sitting in the car, and he's very much a talker, but I'm very much a quiet person, so I
Right.
can literally ride a whole hour with him and not say two words to him. But I mean, it's my dad. I love him. You know what I mean? But we're, you know, I just, if somebody don't kind of like spark the conversation with me, most of the time I'm kind of just quiet. So
Well, let me ask you, Alex, do you find people that, let's say you're in a situation, maybe not with your dad, but maybe somebody else, and you want to be quiet? You're riding along in a car. Do they ever say anything to you about not saying anything? In other
um
words, that you were talking about that a minute ago, where people can kind of judge you because you're not doing what they're doing. So you know that's kind of where a lot of highly sensitive people are. Like I said, many of them are introverts. Not all, but many of them are.
yeah.
And being quiet is a natural state for them because a lot of what goes on in their head is where they live, right? So you know, it's funny. It's kind of funny because my son is highly sensitive, and when he was younger, we would go for rides in the car, you know, to go places, do things, and we could go for an hour, not say a word to each other, and both of us are happy as hell. Didn't bother us, either one of us, to do that, but that was our natural state, right? It's just like I said, it's very much like introverts to be that way. Highly sensitive people, as I said, many of them are introverts, so naturally, highly sensitive people are kind of let quiet that way too.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense now because my dad was telling me like, you know, I I really didn't like start really just talking to people until I was like 5 years old. It's like I knew how to talk, but
Right.
I just was like, you know, I'm in my zone to myself. I don't really talk to a lot of people until I was like really 5 years old when I really just started talking a little bit more. But
Yeah.
which that
Well,
makes sense because my whole life,
look at you now. You're a podcast host, so and you
yeah,
have to talk.
yeah, and you know it's crazy because I'm not so much of a talker, but you know when it comes to somebody else telling me their issues or what's going on in their life, I can help them get through it and help them talk about their life.
Right.
But I don't really just normally just talk myself unless somebody gives me a reason to talk or gives me a topic or things like that. So,
Yeah. Exactly.
that's interesting. I didn't expect that to go that way, but hey. um, so being highly sensitive and then being in a relationship or marriage or things like that. So how does that work? Because I know some people are more so talkative, and then you know, of course, being highly sensitive, you're more so quiet. So how does that work in relationships?
Well, I always say, I've written about this a couple of times in the blogs about uh, relationships with highly sensitive. But that's a big concern with a lot of highly sensitive men, is finding the right partner. You know, I mean, I think everybody should really put a lot of effort into trying to find the right partner for them. But highly sensitive people, it's, I think, especially important because um, if your partner is outgoing and they're, I don't know, they live on the outside of themselves, and you're introverted and more of an HSP, you're going to be living on the inside. So a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. And if they're not comfortable with that, you're not going to be comfortable either. And you'll either be trying to change who you are to fit them, or they'll be trying to change to fit you. So I say for highly sensitive people to be very mindful about the kind of relationships you get involved with, because it's one of the things that highly sensitive people do, and it may not be the best thing, but it's something that happens a lot, and that's people pleasing. So they want to please their partner, and they'll change and they'll drift away from being who they authentically are, and that never really works out very well in the end, because at some point you're going to want to be who you are and they're going to want to be who they are. So again, it just be careful about who you choose if you're a highly sensitive person. And if you're dating a highly sensitive person, be mindful of the fact that they do need downtime. They do need quiet time. They sometimes need alone time. But if you really love the person and you guys match up pretty well everywhere else, you can still make that kind of relationship work. But the thing is, you both have to understand each other. And I think it's incumbent upon the highly sensitive person to be able to share what being highly sensitive means to their potential partner, so that they don't, they're not going in to a relationship with you, not understanding the ins and outs of who you are. So Dr. Elaine Aron and her husband, he's also a psychologist, have written a wonderful book for highly sensitive people called The HSP in Love. And so I would recommend anybody that is a highly sensitive person to read that, because it talks about all those combinations: two highly sensitive people, a highly sensitive person, and not non-highly sensitive, that kind of thing, and what those relationships can wind up, where they can be hard and where they can be easy.
Okay. Huh. So let me ask you this. The world is always ever changing, and there's always different things that's going on. And when people hear a lot of people hear the term sensitive, they think of it in a different light.
Negative.
Yes. So yes, exactly. So how do you deal with hearing, like when you hear, like when you know that you're highly sensitive and you say it, and sometimes people may look at you, like a certain way, or
Right.
they're gonna automatically think the negative. Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, what I try to do is this. Let me just say this. This is not a problem just for highly sensitive people. The term highly sensitive in and of itself has a lot of negative terms, a lot of connotations to it, right? You've heard the term too sensitive. Well, you're too sensitive, or you're too emotional, you're too this. And so we associate that with the word sensitive, but sensitive has a lot of different meanings to it. And the term to describe this trait has been around since the mid-90s, right? So it's been around for 30 years or so. There have been a few people that have tried to create new terms like high sensory intelligence, which is a good way of describing it. Others have to do with high sensing, right? Those are all good words as well. But the vast majority of people know the term now as being highly sensitive. So I look at it like this. As highly sensitive people, we got to own this term, right? We got to develop the narrative that we want people to think about when they think about high sensitivity. So if I talk to somebody and tell them, they'll ask me, well, you wrote some books, what did you write about? And I say a highly sensitive personality trait in men. And they kind of give me that look like, like there's something wrong with that characteristic or that trait or the title of the book or anything. And so what I try to do is explain to them what it is. Dig a little deeper. Sensitive to most people is a very emotional, weak, frail, afraid of criticism type person. It's like a wallflower, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly when men start hearing that term and they associate it with men, it just automatically goes south right away, right? So you have to kind of make them understand. Remember, we talked about the evolutionary reason that the trait is here, and also to talk about the good things about the trait. The things that make highly sensitive people very creative, make them actually very good decision makers. They're a little slow because they process things more deeply. So once they start learning about these positive attributes, then you can start moving the narrative over a little bit to a more positive way of looking at the term sensitive. So it is a difficult challenge. I'm not going to lie about that. And there have been a lot of people in the sensitive community that wanted to change this term because they have to deal with that negativity. Yeah. But I look at it like this, Alex. It's our term. It's what we've been using for 30 years. And I'm just going to press on and try to educate people and help them understand the positive sides of it.
Yeah. I mean, no shame in that, but it's just always good to highlight it so people can really understand because,
sure.
I'm going to be honest. I didn't, when I seen it, I was just like, okay, I was like, I didn't really know the terminology, but I knew it was more to it. So I was like, I want to learn the full story behind it because, you see the term and if you don't know what it is, you just like, you don't know what to think, you know what I'm saying? Some people are going to automatically go negative, but in my mindset, I was just like, okay, well, hey, I know what the topic to focus on. I know, where we're going to go with it and hey, go on from there. But definitely have to, keep pushing and keep making people aware of it because a lot of people don't know that they are HSP, like myself, apparently. So,
well, you would be surprised how many times I get on a podcast and they're in the same place you're at. They don't exactly know what it is, but they're intrigued by it, because it's something different. And half the time I wind up talking about the trait a little bit and they start, I'm kind of like that. And I'm kind of like that. Come to find out that they're highly sensitive. They never knew it. Right. Yeah. And it's like I said, for men, it's a tough one to grab hold of because you don't, it's kind of one of those things. So like if, and I know this is a little sexist here, but a lot of times people think, well, that's a feminine thing, right? That's what women do. Men don't do that stuff. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest problems I think highly sensitive men have is that they have to match up to this masculine thing that we've created over the centuries. Mm-hmm. And all highly sensitive is that these people are more sensitive. Now, sensitivity is a spectrum. Okay, it's like autism. It's a spectrum. So there are highly sensitive people. There are people in the middle who are maybe more sensitive than others, but not quite as high as highly sensitive people. And there are those people on the other end who I don't like to say they're low sensitive because we all have a degree of sensitivity no matter what, but they're more likely more impulsive and they're more outside of themselves, like extroverts, and they're more outgoing. And they're the people in the world who go out and do crazy things that move us forward, right? They take chances and risk. And highly sensitive people are on the other side of the spectrum, kind of saying, okay, hold on now, you keep driving like that, you're going to take us off the cliff, in the bus, right? So they're the ones who kind of put the brakes on, and the people on the other side are the ones who put the foot on the gas. So you have to have that to have a balance in society, and you have to have a balance in our species. So you could be anywhere on that spectrum. The highly sensitive people are on the higher end, but everybody has a degree of sensitivity or else they'd never survive.
Right. I agree. So how do you feel your own experience as HSP shaped your perspective on the role of sensitivity and masculinity in society?
Well, I tell you what, I grew up in the South, and I grew up in a traditional Southern family where masculine roles were all clearly defined, right?
Right.
And I was never like that. I was a different kid, so I learned early on that if I wanted to get along, I had to conform. I had to sort of bend myself to fit that role model. And over the course of my life, that's what I did. I kind of denied a part of who I was. But you got to understand, when I was a kid, there was no such thing as high sensitivity. I mean, it existed, and it's existed throughout the history of humans beings. But the idea is that nobody knew about it. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody explained that it's a normal trait. And it wasn't until I was an adult, well, probably in my 50s before I even knew that this thing existed. So throughout that whole period of time before I learned about high sensitivity, I kept thinking, well, I do get emotional sometimes. I have a great degree of empathy for people. I can be moved and touched by certain things that occur around me, and I'm aware of stuff that other people seem to miss. And so I kept thinking this is kind of a conflict of what I was taught what a man was supposed to be. And so I was always butting up against that throughout the course of my life. When I found out about the trait, Alex, honest to God, it took me about 10 years before I could get my hands wrapped around it, because I was fighting that. Think of all those years of conditioning telling me this is what a man's supposed to be. This is what masculine is. And those things that you have that are the softer side of you, the more emotional side of you, that doesn't fit in there somehow. Right. So I was butting against those things through that time. Well, finally, I actually retired and got out of my corporate job, and I started doing my own business, and I started writing about this. And as I wrote about it and learned about it, I started to realize what we're talking about is not a masculine thing or a feminine thing. We're talking about a human thing. Mm-hmm. This goes with human beings. Emotions are programmed into human beings. And to tell a certain segment of the population, the male population, you can't have emotions. You can't express things like that. I mean, it's okay for a man to be angry, but it's not okay for him to be tender. It's not okay for him to be sad and show tears and stuff like that. That's not right. That's a human thing. So as I started writing and finding out more about that, I started saying, you know what, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start redefining what masculinity is to me. And I did that. And I became more comfortable with the idea that this is the way we're programmed to be. Masculinity, femininity, those things are all cultural constructs. They're stuff we made up a long time ago about how men are supposed to be and how women are supposed to be. And you notice now, you're a young guy, you're seeing this stuff happening where people are shifting. Women do men's jobs, men do women's jobs. The thing is that what we're doing is we're realizing that we're human beings and we all deserve the right to be a human being. And that's what I think. Hope I'm answering your question, because that's how it took me to where I am, about embracing my sensitivity, embracing the fact that I can be a sensitive man and still be a man. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, you definitely answered the question. I mean, the going in depth is definitely helpful, especially for, other people that still, on the fence about it, or are trying to figure out, what side they're on as far as are they, highly sensitive, or are they not highly sensitive, or is their spouse or whatever highly sensitive, or are they not highly sensitive, things like that. So, so in your experience, how do the experiences and needs of highly sensitive men differ from those of highly sensitive women?
Of highly sensitive women? Was a question?
So how do in your experience, how do the experiences and needs of highly sensitive men differ from those of highly sensitive women?
Well, I think for men, truly, high sensitivity, the trait runs through both male and females the same way. It's processed the same way. What is different mainly is the fact that I think that men have, like we were saying a minute ago, the masculine sort of definitions that we've got in our head. Those are some of the conflicts that highly sensitive men have. And I think their needs are the same as the highly sensitive women are. They want to be accepted. They want to be loved. They want to be able to be who they are, be authentic, be true to themselves. But because I think the main difference between men and women is that it's more acceptable for women to be highly sensitive in our culture. We just sort of expect women to be that way. Right. But men, we don't. And so the highly sensitive men have to kind of overcome that And as just like I did, you have to at some point say, the hell with it. I'm going to be who I am. And I'm going to accept the fact that I'm a sensitive man and be okay with that. And the minute I did that is the minute I started really allowing myself to be who I was. And man, that's liberating. That's like giving yourself permission to be you. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's yeah. I would agree. One of the biggest things that I find in life is, finding your inner you and accepting that and embracing it and pushing forward. Because at the end of the day, you know, no two people on this earth are the same.
That's right.
So for sure. So what are some of the ways in which men, well, not necessarily men, what are some of the ways in which high sensitivity manifests in the brain and nervous system? And like, do you see that? Like, how do you see that impact on individuals' experiences?
Well, we're obviously wired differently. The way we process information is different. The way we process emotions is different. There's been a lot of studies about the amygdala and hippocampus and how those things work differently for highly sensitive people. And both of those kind of work in conjunction with memory, and they work in conjunction with emotion and how emotion is expressed, and whether it's fearful or fear, flight, or fight, or whatever, those kind of reactions that take place. So there's clearly something that's been done with the brain of a highly sensitive person. It's a little bit different than it is for non-highly sensitive people. And it's funny, it's a good question. I don't think at this point there's been a real good mapping of how the highly sensitive brain works to the point where you could have, pull up a schematic and look at the brain and say, well, this goes in here and it goes out there and it does this. Mm-hmm. I've even asked some research psychologists if they could give me that model, and they say it doesn't exist right now. So unfortunately, I can only give you kind of a general answer to that question, and that the idea is that we know that we're wired different. It's a neurological response, that we have that's different than other people do. But to actually lay out the sort of the map and the lay of the land in the brain and how it works, I can't do that. I would love to be able to do it because I would love to see it myself.
Yeah. Trust me, I definitely understand. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. I hope that most people, were able to get a good feel on HSP and how it affects people's lives and their way of thinking and things like that. But before I get you out of here, the last question is, what advice would you give anybody that's highly sensitive, or any parents that are parenting highly sensitive children?
Well, I like to call it the 3 E's. Number one, it's probably the most important thing to do, is to educate yourself about the trait. There's a lot more information out there today than there was 10, 15 years ago. There's blogs, there's books. The first thing I would do is go to Dr. Aaron's site, and that's at hsperson.com. And there's a test out there. You can take it. It takes about 10 minutes to take the test. You can find out if you're highly sensitive or not by that test. That's kind of the gold standard right now they're using as the way to measure that. And they have a test for children. So if you're a parent and you suspect your child might be highly sensitive, you can take the test in lieu of the child taking the test, and just by describing behaviors and stuff like that. So that's one of the first things I would recommend anybody do, is educate yourself about the trait. The more you know about it, the more comfortable you're going to be with it, and the more likely you're going to be able to do the next thing, which is embrace the trait. Take it, own it. It's yours. It's you. It's who you are, whether you're male or female. So be able to embrace that trait. And by doing that, you also give yourself permission to let go and be yourself, be who you are. And believe me, as I said, that's a very liberating experience. No matter where you are in your journey in life, whether you're older like me or younger like you, if you can do that, whatever remaining time you have, it's going to be a lot more enjoyable. And finally, I call the third E is evangelize. Once you understand about the trait, and once you embrace it in yourself, share that with people you know. Let people, what'll happen is you'll start noticing it in people. You go, God, I bet that guy's a highly sensitive person, or I know she's in HSP. I can tell by the way she does this. Talk about it with them. Explain the trait. If they don't know, make sure you understand. And those three things are, I think, the best things that they can do.
Okay. Well, hey, that's very interesting, and I hope the listeners definitely got a lot of knowledge out of this, and hopefully they visit the website to find out, if they carry the trait, or if they're kids or anything like that, so that way they can make sure that they follow the 3 E's, and then we can. I feel like once each person knows who they are truly, and then they embrace it and things like that, I feel like it just ultimately makes the world a better place, because now you're in a better position of knowing who you truly are. So then whenever you get into a relationship and have a significant other, then now you're able to explain to that person who you are. So now you both are on the same page going forward.
Absolutely.
So definitely. So I definitely thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking the time out and out of your busy schedule, come on the podcast to let the viewers know about HSP. So, anything else that you want to tell the people before we wrap it up?
No, unless you want to visit my website, which is thesensitiveman.com. You can see if you are an HSP and you're an HSP man, I also have a men's group that meets online too. So lots of stuff you can learn from that as well. But thanks, Alex. I really appreciate you having me on. I enjoy our conversation today, and thanks again.
Oh, yes, sir. No problem. Same here. I definitely, so all those links, anybody watching, all those links will be in the description to his website and, things like that. So make sure you guys go check it out. And, hey, you guys just watched another episode of All in All with Alex. See ya.